Hey guys, Brent Porcio, TopVelocity.net. I wanted to talk about long toss. Long toss has been around for a long time, but I want you to understand what it is so we can truly benefit or get the most out of it. So long toss is an opportunity to increase throwing volume and throwing intensity, okay? So when do we want that? When do we want to increase throwing volume, throwing intensity? That's typically in either pre-competition or competition, where the requirement to compete with throwing volume and throwing intensity is at a high demand. In the off season, we don't have that demand. And what we need to do in the off season is we need to follow a lot of the science that shows if we pitch more than 8 months out of the year, we're 5 times more likely to have injury. So we need to take those 4 months and shut down the high demand of throwing volume, throwing intensity, so our body can heal and get out of the wear and tear. And then once we're out of the wear and tear, we can start to develop, rebuild, and go for enhancements in our physical abilities. Okay, so that's typically what an off season should be: bigger, stronger, faster, more mobile in your weight training, and then biomechanical work, not putting a lot of stress on the body, but teaching the body and helping the body find better movement patterns. So when we get into the long toss, it's usually going into pre-competition, or what we call preseason, or competition, which is in season, because that's where throwing volume and throwing intensity demand gets higher and higher and higher to throw more pitches at higher intensities. So that's where it can serve the purpose. Where it starts to hurt the purpose is when it goes past that. So, or when we start trading negatives for the positive. So a positive would be, yeah, I'm going into season, I need more throwing volume. I need more endurance to throw, 50 pitches. I need more, not only just 50 pitches, I'd like to be able to throw 20 of those or 30 of those at high intensity. So this will help. This isn't the only way to train throwing volume and throwing intensity, but it is a way to do it a very common way. So when it starts to hurt and take away from the things that it benefits is when you get negatives out of it. So what would be a negative from long toss? Would be if it changes my mechanics, right? If what I'm doing in long toss is teaching me a new set of mechanics that I don't use on the mound, that would be a negative. Or if the intensities get so high and the mechanics are changing that I start putting massive amount of stress on my arm and my arm starts breaking down and now I'm hurt, okay? So when do these things tend to happen in long toss? Studies show when the distances get so extreme, the mechanics change and then the stress to the arm goes to its maximum, okay? And it depends on the age. Young kids at 120 feet, the stress on the arm can be the maximum. And you watch it as they get older, it goes a little bit higher and higher and higher. But it gets to a point for anyone where you can't maintain the benefits and you start moving into the negatives. So how do we know the negatives are happening? How do we know the mechanics are changing, the stress is getting too high? It really comes down to watching how you're changing what you're doing to get the result, the desired result. So what's the desired result in long toss? So the desired result, you start off at 60 feet, I'm gonna go to 70, I'm going to 80, 90, whatever, I'm gonna keep going. So the desired result is distance, right? So to gain distance initially out of my pitching mechanics, which is what I typically and I should be using when I'm throwing 60 feet, right? Because we always want to repeat the same mechanics over and over so our muscle memory becomes autonomous. It becomes natural. It happens on its own, right? If I'm using all these different mechanics, that's going to make me less consistent in competition, and we're using this in competition. So at 60 feet, I'm throwing out of my pitching delivery. At 70 feet, 80 feet, 90 feet, 120, 150 feet, I'm throwing out of my pitching delivery. And every time I've gained distance, all I've done is increased intensity to add velocity to cover more distance. Well, those are all benefits, right? Until we can't use mechanics and velocity to gain distance, and that happens. That's when you're throwing at 150 feet and now your release point from 60 feet is bouncing the ball twice to your partner at 150 feet. You're done, you're at maximum, because what happens, and studies show, if you try to go past that distance, now you have to change your mechanics and now you start maximizing stress to your arm. And it's interesting because you know that's happening because velocity actually almost starts to come down because velocity is no longer what you're using to gain distance. Now you're using angles and different movements to the body to get to those angles to cover more distance, and that is now destroying the ultimate purpose, which was to increase distance with velocity. So when you're sitting there and all of a sudden you hit 150 feet and you can't throw it on a line anymore, and now you got to shorten your stride, you got to spin your hips harder, spin your trunk harder, release the ball maybe even off to the side and throw the ball at a higher trajectory, you're now bringing negatives into this training tool. Studies show that. Studies show when guys in this ASMI study went past 180 feet, close to 300 feet, they started shortening their strides and relying more on the rotational movements of the pelvis and trunk, flexion, extension in the arm. Not only that, it put an excessive amount of stress on the elbow. So as far as I'm concerned, we don't need those negatives, right? We don't need the high stress negatives. We don't need the bad mechanics negatives, because studies showed the mechanics they were using were not similar at all to what they use in the mound. So when you get to the point where you can no longer go through your pitching delivery and increase distance through intensity and velocity, you've capped out. You're done. Start bringing it in. Anything past that through bad mechanics, high trajectories is hurting you. It's working against you. And I wouldn't let coaches teach you otherwise, because the science won't support their recommendations, okay? The other thing is, if you're sitting there having to do running throws to get there, that's a change in mechanics. That's not how you pitch on the mound. I might give you one step into your delivery, maybe two to the most. But when it gets to too much momentum and it's just, you're flipping on yourself, you're not using the same mechanics you use on the mound. So I hope this helps, guys. Long toss is a very popular practice of pitchers. My recommendation and standards are only use them in pre-competition and in competition. Do not use it if it changes or works you out of your mechanics you use on the mound, and if you're, specifically because of that, you start feeling a lot of stress in the arm. If you feel a lot of stress in the arm, that's another reason to bring it back in. Something is not clean, something is not efficient in your delivery. You need to get out of that volume intensity, you need to improve the kinetic chain, and then you need to work yourself back to it. So guys, I hope that helps. I wish you guys the best in your career. If you have any questions about this, I know it's a hot topic, we'll love to answer your questions on long tossing.